About a month ago, I was hard at work trying to write down some cohesive thoughts on the newest film set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Widow. Like with most movies I have and will review on this channel, I wanted to pace myself and let the film ferment within my mind. First impressions, after all, can be unreliable indications of someone's true opinion on art, especially with something as bombastic and explosive as a Marvel film. But here's the thing about Black Widow. The more I gave that film time to settle itself into my brain space, the less it stuck around. Plot details quickly faded into my memory, and such was also the case with lines of dialogue, visual flourishes, and any messages the film tried to leave behind. It was such a standard, cookie-cutter Marvel film that it lacked the personality and staying power to rank among the franchise's best installments. There are a few things that really suck about this. The first being that this was the first film in the MCU released after a 2-year period of nothing. The COVID-19 pandemic has its fair share of blame for that one, but nonetheless, there was a Marvel movie drought that we weren't used to, so to get something so mediocre was disheartening. On top of that though, this was also a long overdue solo film for a character that's been present in the MCU for over a decade, dating back to Iron Man 2. Given how long she held membership on the original Avengers team without getting her own show or movie, releasing one after her character had already canonically died seems disingenuous, especially given the final product's quality. But perhaps worst of all is that it served as a catalyst for my quickly declining enthusiasm for the franchise. Before you start going all keyboard warrior on me though, don't assume that me saying that means that I hate the MCU or that I'll cease to watch these movies and shows. Far from it actually. My goal here is not to put together some type of rant or spread negativity. Rather, I just want to express my honest opinion as a fan, as well as from the perspective of being a consumer of popular art in general. Really, I just want to express that thus far, Phase 4 is not shaping up to be that impressive to me. In fact, it's in danger of morphing into a monotonous chore to follow up with all of these movies and shows. Given how satisfied people were with Avengers Endgame, myself included, we all knew that Disney and Marvel were going to be hard-pressed to retain interest among their fan base. They were bound to do something about it, but I'm not sure if the strategy they're currently going with is working all that well, at least for me anyway. Remember a couple of minutes ago when I was talking about how the pandemic disrupted Marvel's release schedule? That was indeed true, but a dangerous side effect was how Marvel planned out their whole entire year of Marvel content in 2021. It started out somewhat strong with WandaVision, which I did release a full review of on the channel. I liked the show for the most part, but then my disappointment kicked in when the show didn't fully follow through in its character concepts and plot threads, instead servicing the baser instincts of MCU properties with its laughably bad action scenes in the finale, and setting up elements for future stories like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness to explore. We didn't get much of a break after that series was complete, for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier then premiered 2 weeks later, and honestly, its ambitions were mostly the same as WandaVision, even though it yielded even weaker results. The series had good intentions, and in some ways it delivered on expanding some of the characters it introduced, but it hardly stuck the landing for me. We could talk about the clumsily handled political messages, unnecessarily drawn out and unpredictable plot, and squandered potential for the villains, but at the end of the day, what did this series really accomplish? Once again, we have a character truly coming into their own with a new costume and identity closer to the comics, and plot lines are teased for more movies and shows to come. Falcon and the Winter Soldier felt much more satisfying as setup for other Marvel stories than as its own entity, which made the build-up to those setups feel less compelling in hindsight. The same thing then happened with Black Widow, and I bring all this up because one of my pet peeves with modern cinema is how these placeholder filler movies with lackluster plots keep getting made with the sole intention of making enough money to justify more sequels. I mean, a lot of the other MCU movies prior to Endgame served the same purpose, but there are a couple of reasons why this cynical business practice didn't feel as pronounced with those movies. Many of those films were written with complete, contained stories that were satisfying on their own terms, while also serving the purpose of building up to something else. Iron Man, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok. These were all movies that were fun to experience as their own movies, and while their post-credit scenes certainly teased other projects to come, I left those movies wanting to see more rather than feeling forced into catching up with the story. Secondly, but perhaps more importantly, the event Marvel was building up to was much more pronounced and clear. We all knew after the end of the Avengers that this big purple guy was going to mean something, and eventually that all came to a head, and it was supremely satisfying to witness. Right now, Phase 4's trajectory seems a bit unclear, but based on some things we have seen, I'm not sure if I'm liking where it's headed. I'll address that in a second, but otherwise, the MCU movies and shows released in 2021 have suffered from serious conceptual limitations. From how I see things, the ultimate goal is leaning in the direction of setup, but not so much build-up. The strongest impact that these stories are leaving is the promise of something greater, rather than doing something unique and special on their own. The reliance on this well-established but played-out Marvel formula is one thing, yet the other issue is the absolutely overwhelming release schedule that Marvel's going with this year. In the past, when the MCU was contained to just the cinema, we'd get an average of about 2 or 3 movies a year. This was an accepted norm, but then we had that slight drought, and I kind of liked that break to let the previous movies settle in my memory. 2020 may not have had a lot of heavy cinematic hitters, but at least the movies we did get were a refreshing change of pace. Instead of the mainstream cinema discourse being only about superhero films or whatever the disposable release of the week was, discussions were had about movies that people normally don't get the opportunity to hear about. But now the big movies are coming back, and I realized how much I didn't miss getting candy-coated filler thrown at my face. In the second half of this year alone, we're getting 4 Marvel films in the span of 5 months. We already got Black Widow last month, then we'll get Shang-Chi in a couple of weeks, Eternals comes out in November, and then Spider-Man will be home for Christmas. But then there are all of the Disney Plus shows to consider. 3 were already completed early in the year, What If just started, in a very mediocre and poorly edited way if I might add, and we're supposed to get at least 1 or 2 more series before the year is over. And do you realize how much friggin' material that is? I mean, on one hand, if you're a die-hard Marvel fan, I'm sure you're probably frothing at the mouth waiting for all of these movies and shows to release. I myself am excited for a fair number of these things, but at the same time, I'm afraid that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to implode on itself. Who knows, maybe I'm just underestimating how much mileage this franchise really has. My concern though is that if Marvel keeps producing content that leaves little lasting impressions beyond just cool action-packed moments and references to things people like from other movies, people are going to lose interest. And for me, I don't think the solution is to literally triple their creative output. It's quickly getting to the point where one thing, such as a Disney Plus series, is still ongoing while something else like a movie starts up, and there's so much crossover and simultaneous promotion that fans don't have enough time to process something before another thing is forced upon them. And to be frank with you, I don't like that. I recognize that I'm probably coming across as really cynical and negative here, but what Disney is doing can't be ignored. Their modern content isn't made to last, unlike movies made with true artistic integrity. It's like comparing fast food to a snazzy sit-down restaurant. You go get 4 tacos at Jack in the Box, and yeah, the greasy meal is suitable, but you'll either regret the choice you made or consider it a fast, simple solution to a mild craving you had. But then you go to a 5-star steakhouse, and yeah, the bar for entry may be high, but what you get in return is reflected by the admission price. It's not just about food, but the aesthetic of the building, the atmosphere presented by the lighting and music, and the quality of the service experience enhance what ultimately becomes a meal you could call both fulfilling and utterly satisfying. Stories from the MCU were certainly a cut above fast food, but they're being produced and released under a similar mentality. Get them out quickly, feed the masses, make a quick buck, rinse and repeat. If this franchise has any hope of surviving long term, then they should be made like Loki, which thus far is the only thing I've truly loved from Marvel since Avengers Endgame came out. The only concerning thing I can say about season 1 of this show is that its finale poses major implications for the franchise at large, that being the establishment of the multiverse. Given how much content is being pushed out by Marvel right now, I'm not ready to be overwhelmed by the prospect of alternate timelines and narratives intersecting with each other. Even so, if they can follow through on those possibilities with the level of craft and creativity present in this particular show, then Marvel could have a bright future ahead of them. Unlike its contemporaries, Loki goes beyond the expected standards from the franchise and actually takes bold risks with the storytelling and visual design. I can't say that everything about it works, but I would much rather have a fascinating story with personality than something that plays 100% by the book. Its visuals, dialogue, music, and performances have stuck with me longer than other recent Marvel projects, since the cast and crew dared to do something different, and to mostly great results. I don't think this series has to innovate each and every time they release something new, but if Disney wants the franchise to thrive over time, they can't keep sticking with the same formula of telling a generic, predictable story masquerading as a commercial for future movies. This isn't the case for everyone, but I desire for more from my entertainment. The MCU has shown that it can be full of wonder and creativity, and if we continue to get 10+ movies and shows each year, I hope that creativity might also continue so that it don't lose interest. But on that note, moving forward, my plan is not to review most, if not all, Marvel material that's released in the coming months. If one stands out as something particularly special to me, then I may dedicate an entire video to the subject, but otherwise, I don't want my channel to stagnate from talking about the same kind of thing each month. For the sake of those following my channel, I want to give you more unique content to enjoy, which won't happen if I focus my time on Marvel-related stuff. My time is too short to force me into becoming a one-trick pony. But otherwise, thank you for taking the time to watch this and just listen to me talk for a little bit. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the notification squadron so that you don't miss out on my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good one.